He escaped the house they built to bury him. Now the world knows he's alive. But some people prefer him dead. And they're not finished. She helped him find the truth inside. But what's waiting outside might destroy them both. They had barely finished dinner when the second email arrived. Subject: urgent, national morning show segment offer. They wanted Mason live on air. In 3 days. No pre-recordings. No edits. Just him and the world. Samantha stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Mason sat across from her, quieter than usual, eyes fixed on the glowing screen. "This changes everything," she said gently. He didn't nod. He didn't smile. Instead, he stood slowly and walked to the window. The city lights blinked back at him. "Or ends everything," he whispered. Because going public wasn't just about the truth, it was about survival. And the people who had tried to bury him once weren't going to applaud when he finally stood. The next morning, Samantha noticed the white van parked across the street. No logos. No driver in sight. Just there idling. Watching. She pulled the curtain halfway and whispered, "It's starting." Mason joined her silently. His face paled further when he saw the plate. "That's the same type of van my father used for private security. Elaine might have sent it. They didn't call the police. What would they say? Help, we're being watched by rich people who almost let me die?" Instead, Samantha made a call of her own, to the same underground contact who helped them escape. This time her voice was sharper. "We need new names, new phones, new locations. No questions. We'll pay." By nightfall the van was gone, but in its place a letter arrived. No postmark. No return address. Just one sentence handwritten on thick card. "The deeper you dig, the more graves you'll find." Samantha couldn't sleep. The van. The letter. The interview. It was all too much. So while Mason rested, she searched again through the files he'd brought from the clinic. One folder, untouched until now, had a name she didn't recognize: Julian Carter. She opened it. Inside were documents, old family records, and a medical transcript showing 2 male children born to Mason's parents. One listed as deceased at age 19. But the death certificate was incomplete. No cause. No coroner. Just a stamp. Status, presumed. She whispered aloud. They never confirmed it. Mason appeared in the doorway. "Julian," he said quietly. "My older brother. They said he drowned while abroad. Nobody. No goodbye. Just a funeral with an empty casket." Samantha looked up, eyes wide. "What if he's alive, Mason? What if he's part of this?" Mason sat beside her, staring at the half-finished death certificate. And for the first time since they left the house, he looked truly afraid. Mason couldn't stop pacing. His hands trembled as he held the photo they found clipped to Julian's file. It was old, grainy, but showed 2 boys laughing beside a lake. One was Mason. The other, taller, stronger, had the same sharp jawline and eyes. "He used to protect me," Mason said, voice distant. "When Father died, he changed. Quiet. Secretive. Then suddenly gone." Samantha examined the photo carefully. Behind the boys stood a car. A black luxury model with a rare emblem. She zoomed in on the license plate, barely visible. "This could help us track where it was taken," she said. "It might lead us to the last place Julian was seen." But before they could plan further, Samantha's backup phone buzzed with a restricted call. She answered. A deep voice whispered, "Stop looking into Julian. He's not who you remember. And if you find him, he won't save you." Then silence. Mason lowered the photo slowly. His breath was shallow. Because he now knew something neither of them wanted to admit. Julian might not be dead. But he might not be safe either. They agreed to meet in public. Samantha's underground contact had one condition. No phones, no laptops, no recording devices. "We'll talk like it's 1995, he had said. So they chose an old bookstore cafe tucked between forgotten buildings, quiet, dusty, and safe. Mason wore a hoodie, trying to blend in. Samantha carried only a notepad. The man was already waiting when they arrived, mid-40s, shaved head, sharp eyes. "Call me Reed," he said, not offering a hand. "You asked about Julian. That's dangerous." He slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a photo, blurry, recent, and unmistakable. Julian. Alive. Beard now heavier but undeniably him. He's been living under aliases, Reed whispered. Goes off-grid, resurfaces, then vanishes again. Some say he's in hiding. Others say he's working for someone powerful. Mason's hands shook. Why would he disappear if he wasn't in danger? Reed looked directly at him. The real question is, what did he know that made him disappear willingly? That night, back at the safe house, Mason couldn't stop staring at the photo of Julian. His brother was older now, harder. The kind of face shaped by years of silence. Samantha sat across from him, spreading out the rest of the medical files from the clinic. There's still something missing, she said. You were supposed to be dying, but no one ever found a clear diagnosis. She pointed to one sheet. This scan was dated 3 weeks before I met you. It says your vitals were declining, but the scan is identical to the one they did last week. Same markings. Same timestamp hidden in the file properties. Mason blinked. You mean they reused a scan? Samantha nodded. Someone faked your decline, Mason. You weren't dying. You were being reported as dying. There's a difference. The realization hit him like a freight train. He hadn't been failing. He'd been fed failure. And if Elaine went this far to fake his condition, what else had she erased? The next day, Samantha received an anonymous text on the new burner phone. Clinic whistleblower found dead. Car crash. Sudden. No survivors. She froze. The only person who'd quietly helped her verify Mason's altered scans had just vanished. Mason noticed her reaction and crossed the room. What happened? She showed him the screen. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mason said, "This isn't just about hiding me. It's about silencing everyone who ever questioned why." They began looking back through Reed's file, tracing Julian's last known location. A boarding house outside the city. Cash only. No paper trail. Reed had marked the address with one word. Safe. That question now felt more like a warning than a possibility. Samantha started packing. We leave at midnight, she said. If Julian's alive, he's either running from them or working with them. And if it was the second, they'd just made themselves his next target. The drive took 3 hours. They avoided highways, changed cars once, and didn't speak unless necessary. When they reached the address, it was almost dawn. The boarding house looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 80s. Chipped paint, flickering lights. A rusted sign that read Ashford Rooms. Samantha checked them in under aliases. The woman at the front desk barely looked up. Room 11, she muttered. No visitors after 9. They went upstairs. Mason moved slower now, the exhaustion from travel catching up with him. But his steps were steady. Determined. Room 11 was small, 2 twin beds, peeling wallpaper, and a single window facing an alley. But taped to the underside of the drawer in the bedside table, they found it. A key. Wrapped in cloth. And a note. If you found this, he's still out there. But be careful. Julian is not who he used to be. It wasn't signed. But the handwriting matched the letter Mason once wrote when he thought he was dying. Someone who knew both brothers had been here. And they were afraid. They didn't sleep. Not after that note. Instead, Samantha scanned through every face in the boarding house as they walked the nearby streets that morning. Then she saw him, sitting alone at a cafe across from the building. Hood up. A scar across his left cheek. Watching. Not eating. Mason, she said under her breath. That man's been there since we arrived. He hasn't moved. Mason turned then froze. That's not Julian. But I've seen him before. He used to guard the house when my father was still alive. He worked for our family's private firm. Elaine's watching again, Samantha whispered. She's tracking us through him. They didn't confront the man. Instead, they bought 2 train tickets in the next town over, paid in cash, and left the boarding house through the fire escape. 20 minutes later, Samantha saw the man get into a black car, following the main road toward the station. He'd missed them. For now, they took the train 2 towns north, to a quiet coastal city with foggy mornings and empty streets. It was safer for now. Mason barely spoke the entire ride. His eyes flicked constantly to the door, to the faces passing by. Samantha sat beside him alert, holding the wrapped key in her coat pocket. By nightfall they checked into a small motel. Samantha couldn't sleep. The more she replayed the timeline, the more something tugged at her. The key. The note. The strange half-hint about Julian. There had to be a link. She opened her laptop and connected through a secure line Reed had given her. In the encrypted messages she typed, "We found a key. 14L. Unknown location. Any pattern?" The response came 5 minutes later. 14L is a shipping locker code. Portside. You're close. Mason sat up when she told him. If Julian left something there, it means he's still watching. Still leaving signals. Samantha nodded. Or he's baiting us. Either way they had to find out. The port smelled like salt, rust and secrets. Fog rolled in thick waves across the docks as Samantha and Mason navigated through rows of shipping lockers. Some were open and empty, others sealed tight. But near the far edge, marked with faded red paint, they found it. Locker 14L. The key slid in easily. The door creaked open. Inside wasn't cargo. It was a message. An old military-style duffel bag sat at the center, and inside it, documents, flash drives, a burner phone, and a thick leather-bound journal. On the inside cover, in shaky handwriting. To whoever finds this, don't trust the name Carter. Not even mine. Julian Mason stared down at it, hands trembling. He's alive. And running from something. Samantha flipped through the journal. There were maps, dates, and something worse. Photos. Of Mason. Hooked to hospital machines. Sleeping. Unaware. With timestamps from just 3 months ago. Taken from inside the Carter house. They spread the contents of the duffel bag across the motel bed with silent reverence. As if touching memories too dangerous to speak aloud. Samantha flipped carefully through Julian's journal, while Mason scanned the photos with hollow eyes. Every page of that journal was a breadcrumb trail. Each scribbled note more paranoid than the last. Julian had been on the run for years. Hiding in South Africa, slipping through borders in Eastern Europe. Living under assumed names in Ghana and Brazil. He wrote about being watched, about secret meetings gone wrong, and about the signature room. A phrase underlined 3 times without explanation. But what struck Samantha most was Julian's shift in tone. Halfway through the journal, his entries stopped being about escape, and became focused on Mason. They've started on him now, one page read. They're prepping him the same way they prepped me. Containment disguised as care. If he ever finds this, know it wasn't a sickness. It was obedience. I refused. That's why I vanished. She looked up, heart hammering in her chest. Mason, he didn't leave because he was scared. He left because he wouldn't play the role they scripted for him. Mason didn't reply. He sat on the edge of the bed, one photo in hand, himself unconscious, dated 4 months before Samantha ever arrived. The curtains fluttered slightly from the cracked window, but the air felt too still, too quiet. It was as if the weight of the truth had sucked the oxygen out of the room. If Julian was right, then Mason's so-called illness had never been biological. It had been behavioral, managed, maintained, and manipulated. But for what purpose? Inheritance? Image? Control? And if Elaine and whoever she worked with had tried to break 2 sons, what else were they capable of? The phrase wouldn't leave Samantha's mind. The signature room. It didn't sound like a clinic or a location tied to health. It sounded curated, elite, and sinister. She typed the name into her secure laptop, avoiding common search engines. What popped up chilled her. The signature room was a discreet private floor inside an exclusive luxury estate called the Harrow Pavilion. On the surface, it was a wellness resort for the ultra-wealthy, but deeper research revealed NDAs, off-the-record referrals, and no photos of the inside. Only one line stood out in an archived comment thread. If your family has too much to hide, send them to Harrow. Samantha looked at Mason, her mouth dry. This isn't a clinic. It's where people send inconvenient heirs, broken relatives, or anyone who threatens the brand. Mason's face darkened. I remember that name. Once years ago, I overheard Elaine on the phone. She said, Julian tried to walk out of the signature room, and look where he ended up. That was it. The puzzle was tightening. Julian hadn't run away out of fear. He'd likely escaped. And Mason, before Samantha entered his life, had probably been next. If she hadn't intervened, he might have never gotten back up from that wheelchair. They decided to go deeper. Samantha contacted Reed again, asking for anything he could pull on Harrow. But her message bounced back, encrypted line closed. Suspended. She checked again. Nothing. The underground contact was either compromised or silenced. "We're on our own now," she said. Mason nodded. "Then we finish what Julian started." But outside the window, parked across the street from their motel, was a silver car that hadn't been there before. The same one they'd seen near the port. They weren't just being followed anymore. They were being watched and maybe hunted. They left the motel before dawn. Samantha had memorized a secondary route 2 nights ago, just in case. They didn't take the car. They walked for 15 minutes, turned through back alleys, and flagged a passing courier van, paying the driver double to take them 2 towns over without asking questions. By noon they arrived at a cheap hotel beneath a train bridge. Loud. Grimy. But invisible. Just what they needed. They barely had time to breathe when the front desk rang their room. "Someone's here to see you," the receptionist said, voice clipped. "Says his name is Bennett. From Harrow." Samantha's blood turned to ice. She looked at Mason. He was already pulling on his jacket. "Let him up," he said. When the man entered, he looked nothing like the cold professionals they had expected. No suit. No briefcase. Just dark clothes, a flat expression, and a notebook tucked under his arm. He sat without asking. "My name is Matthew Bennett. I worked at Harrow's signature room for 6 years. I left 2 months ago after I couldn't stay silent anymore." Samantha narrowed her eyes. "Why come to us?" "Because Julian helped me escape," he said, voice low. "And I think he's trying to help you too." Bennett opened the notebook and slid it across the table. Inside were sketches, layouts of the signature room. Restricted floors. Medication logs. A list of names, powerful families, known business heirs, politicians' children. And at the bottom, Mason Carter. "You weren't supposed to die," Bennett said. "You were supposed to forget who you were. Slowly. Until they owned your name." Mason clenched his jaw. "But I remember now." Bennett leaned forward. "Then you'll need more than memory to survive what's coming." Bennett didn't stay long. Just long enough to hand over 2 USB drives and warn them to leave everything familiar. His final words echoed in Samantha's mind long after he left. "They don't erase people with bullets anymore. They erase them with paperwork." That night, Mason sat on the edge of the bed, USB in hand, silent. Samantha waited. Eventually he spoke. "I found out something a few years ago before I got sick. Something my mother never wanted me to see. I'd applied for a passport renewal, and it got delayed. When I pushed, I found out I wasn't listed under Carter. Not originally." Samantha frowned. "What do you mean?" He opened the drive and pulled up a scanned document. "My original birth certificate. It says Mason Blaine. My father's name before he changed it. Elaine didn't want me tied to his old identity or what he stood for. So she buried it. Changed our history. Even Julian, his name was changed after he vanished. No one would ever know we were connected." Samantha sat beside him. "Why would she do that?" Mason exhaled. "Because my father started Harrow, but tried to shut it down before he died. He found out what it was really being used for." "And Elaine kept it running?" Mason nodded. "And rebranded the Carter family to protect it. Which means this isn't just about control or inheritance anymore. It's about legacy," Samantha whispered. "And erasing the one person who could expose it." Mason looked at the USB again. "Then it's time we expose everything." But in the hallway just outside, a shadow moved silently past the door. Someone had been listening. They heard it just after midnight. A soft thud. Too heavy for plumbing, too purposeful for coincidence. Samantha turned off the lamp, eyes trained on the door. Mason motioned for her to stay quiet. They moved in sync, careful, silent. From the peephole, Mason saw the hallway was empty, but the room beside theirs now had light under the door. It had been dark earlier. Vacant. Samantha tapped on her phone and pulled up the hotel's front desk number. "Can you tell me if room 7 is booked?" she asked, keeping her voice low. The receptionist hesitated. That room's listed as unoccupied, she finally said. Has been for 3 weeks. Samantha ended the call and turned to Mason. We're not alone. Mason already had the duffel bag zipped. The USBs, journal, and Julian's photos were tucked safely inside. We leave now, he said. Through the back. They exited down the service stairs, avoiding the main hall. But as they stepped into the alley behind the hotel, a figure emerged from the shadows. Not Bennett. Not the scarred man from before. This one was younger. Suited. Calm. He didn't raise his hands or speak. He only said, "You're making this far more complicated than it has to be, Mason." Mason stepped in front of Samantha. And you've made it far too clear that being easy would have killed me. Le mensite. You have until midnight tomorrow to walk away. Publicly. Silently. No story.
No headlines.
Samantha's voice was ice. Or what? The man didn't flinch. Or your brother won't be the only one who disappears. Then he turned and melted into the shadows as quickly as he'd come. They didn't sleep. Not even a minute. Mason paced the tiny room of the budget motel they'd found 5 blocks away, clutching the USB drive in one hand and a burner phone in the other. Samantha, seated at the edge of the bed, scrolled through news outlets and encrypted message boards, searching for any mention of Julian, Harrow, or the signature room. There was nothing, no trace. The silence wasn't just eerie now, it was tactical. They've erased every lead, she said quietly. They've shut down your family's traces like they're erasing a chapter from a book. Mason nodded, jaw tense. And tomorrow we're next. The man's words from the alley echoed in both their minds. You have until midnight tomorrow. It was a countdown. A threat. Promise. They had 24 hours to decide. Go public and risk everything, or vanish like Julian. But Samantha wasn't built for retreat. We upload the documents. The footage. Everything. But we do it with protection. We schedule the release to multiple sources with time drops. If anything happens to us, the truth still spreads. Mason stared at her, eyes wide with gratitude. You were supposed to be my goodbye, he whispered. Not my rescue. Samantha shook her head. You were never supposed to die, Mason. You were just inconvenient. Now we make the world remember your name. And everything they tried to bury with it. As the clock ticked toward dawn, Mason finally sat beside her. They opened Bennett's files. Every document. Every sketch. And they began to prepare the biggest move of their lives. Because if tomorrow was the end, it was going to end with noise, not silence. By mid-morning, the files were uploaded to 3 secure platforms. One scheduled for 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the deadline. One to a journalist Samantha once trusted from her previous job. And one to an anonymous data leak forum with a global reach. They didn't expect all of them to go live. But they didn't need all. They just needed one. Mason created a video statement in a dim corner of the room. He spoke slowly, his voice steady. My name is Mason Blaine, formerly known as Mason Carter. For years I was manipulated, medically suppressed, and labeled as terminal to protect a family empire built on secrets. I am not sick. I am not broken. But I was made to believe I was, for money, for image, for power. This is the truth they never wanted you to hear. He looked straight into the lens. If you're watching this, then we didn't make it. But the story did. When it ended, Samantha uploaded the video to the release queue. Then she backed it up in 4 separate clouds. Then 2 external drives. They couldn't afford to lose it. Every word Mason said could unravel Elaine's empire. And everything Julian had risked could finally see daylight. But just as they were encrypting the last batch of documents, the motel's fire alarm screeched to life. Not a test. Not a drill. Real panic. Screaming in the hallway. Smoke. Samantha grabbed the bag. Mason threw open the door. And flames danced at the end of the corridor. Someone had found them. And this time, they weren't leaving quietly. The fire was no accident. That much was clear. The flames roared from the stairwell, climbing like hands meant to trap, not chase. The front entrance was already cut off. Someone had blocked it with a burning mattress. Smoke curled into their room, thick and toxic. But Samantha didn't panic. She moved fast, yanking open the bathroom window and throwing the duffel bag out first. "The fire escape," she shouted. "Now!" Mason followed, coughing hard but steady. They climbed out just as smoke began billowing through the ceiling vents. The metal stairs shook under their weight, slick with ash and rust. Below, the alley was empty, no fire truck. No help. Only a black SUV turning slowly onto the side street. Samantha and Mason hit the ground and ran. They didn't look back until they reached the train yard 3 blocks away, ducking behind a freight container. Samantha pulled out the USB drives from her hoodie pocket, miraculously still intact. Mason doubled over, coughing, his voice hoarse. "They wanted to trap us. Burn the evidence with us inside." Samantha nodded. "But they failed." And then her phone buzzed. One of the journalist's contacts had replied. "We believe you. But we need one thing to go live, proof of origin. Someone from inside." Samantha looked up at Mason. "They need Julian." Silence fell over them. Mason looked down the tracks stretching into the unknown. "He's out there," Mason whispered. "And I think I know where he'll be tonight." Samantha's eyes narrowed. "Where?" Mason stood straighter, eyes burning now, not from smoke but from clarity. The place they took him from the first time. The place he tried to escape. Harrow. The car ride to Harrow was silent. They used a stolen vehicle, abandoned near the train yard by someone less careful. The GPS was off. Mason drove this time, his grip firm on the wheel. The road curved through dense trees until a long winding driveway appeared, flanked by high fences and stone pillars. The Harrow Wellness Pavilion sat at the end like a castle designed to swallow secrets. From the outside it looked pristine, white columns, glass walls, manicured gardens. But Samantha saw it differently now. A beautiful cage. A place where reputations were cleaned and people were rewritten. They parked deep in the woods and approached on foot. Samantha reached into her pocket and pulled out Julian's key 14L. "If he came back, he didn't come through the front door," she whispered. "He's smarter than that." Mason nodded. "There's an underground maintenance tunnel. I remember it. He showed it to me once years ago. I thought he was just being dramatic. I didn't know he was planning to escape." They followed a narrow trail behind the building, hidden by ivy and decay. There, half buried beneath overgrowth, was a rusted metal door. Mason pried it open. The air inside was cold and smelled of damp stone. They stepped in. Each footstep echoed like a threat. Pipes hissed above. Somewhere in the dark a light flickered, faint but deliberate. And then a voice whispered from the shadows. "Took you long enough." Samantha froze. Mason's breath caught. Because stepping into the weak light, scruffy, bearded but alive, was Julian. Julian stood still for a long moment, letting the silence thicken between them. Then slowly he smiled just a little. Not warmth. Recognition. A flicker of the brother Mason remembered in a world that had tried to erase both of them. Mason stepped forward, voice cracking. "They told me you drowned." Julian tilted his head. "They told me you died last week." He looked over at Samantha. "I see you found someone who didn't listen." Samantha nodded. "We found your journal. Your warnings. The signature room, the files, everything. We know what Harrow really is." Julian led them deeper into the tunnel, into a small hidden chamber. A forgotten maintenance station he'd been living in for weeks. Maps covered the walls.
Surveillance photo.
Names. Julian hadn't just survived. He'd been watching, documenting, preparing. "They used this place to sanitize reputations," Julian said. "They don't kill people. They erase who they were and build someone useful from the pieces. If the family's powerful enough, no one asks why a child disappears, or why they come back smiling and hollow." Mason sat down, shaking. "Why didn't you come for me?" "I tried," Julian said, kneeling beside him. "But I was already off-grid. The moment they knew I was alive, they hunted me. You were the bait. I stayed away to keep them away from you. I didn't know they'd start early." Samantha pulled out the USB drive. "We have everything. Documents. Testimonies. Your voice could trigger an investigation." Julian narrowed his eyes. "And get us all killed in the process." Mason looked at his brother. "Then help us be loud enough they can't bury it this time." Julian stared at the files in silence, then nodded once. Julian led them deeper into Harrow's belly, past crumbling stone and forgotten walls. There's a room, he said, voice low. It's where they store everything they can't destroy. Real medical records, signed documents, evidence that could ruin clients if it ever surfaced. He stopped beside a steel door covered in dust. They call it the vault. Samantha ran her fingers along the keypad. Biometric access? Julian nodded. I cloned a master print before I escaped, but it only opens once before locking out for 72 hours. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Steel shelves lined the room, stacked with unmarked boxes. Samantha immediately pulled down one labeled Carter, Blaine Medical A. Mason flipped it open and nearly collapsed. Inside were video logs, files marked with false diagnoses, medication charts that contradicted everything Elaine had ever told him. One file read, subject exhibits normal neurological patterns, recommends psychoactive suppression for behavioral conditioning, scheduled termination of physical therapy to begin June 21st. That was the day I stopped walking, Mason said quietly. Not because I couldn't, because they stopped helping me. Julian pulled another box from the corner labeled Archive Blacklist. Inside were names of other patients, disappeared children, rebranded heirs, silenced whistleblowers. Each with one common phrase, deemed non-compliant with projected legacy. Samantha took photos of everything. Every page, every signature. This is what we need to blow this open. Not just your story, everyone's. But then the door groaned behind them. Mason froze. It's Elaine. Julian shook his head, grim.
No.
Elaine doesn't come down here herself. A red light blinked to life on the ceiling. Security had been triggered. Someone else was coming. And this time they weren't alone. Julian moved first, slamming the lid on the nearest box and yanking Mason to his feet. There's another exit, he said, voice sharp. But it's not on the blueprints. Staff didn't even know it existed. Only the founder did. My father, Mason whispered. Julian nodded. He built it after he realized Harrow had become something else. They sprinted down the corridor past the vault, Samantha clutching the duffel like her life depended on it. Behind them, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed. Heavy, coordinated. Whoever was coming wasn't coming alone. They were armed, prepared, and closing in. Julian led them to a wall that looked like every other, gray, damp, cracked. But he pressed 2 fingers on a panel and the concrete shifted with a mechanical groan. A hidden door creaked open, revealing a narrow spiral stairwell. Down, he shouted. They descended in near darkness, the stairwell spiraling into what felt like the bones of the earth. As they moved, the door above slammed shut again just in time. Voices echoed behind it, muffled and urgent. Then a bang. Another. Gunshots. Mason nearly tripped. Samantha caught him. Keep moving, she hissed. They're not trying to scare us anymore. At the bottom of the stairwell, the passage opened into a utility tunnel that led to the back of the Harrow estate. Cold night air blasted them in the face as they pushed through a steel door disguised behind an old maintenance shed. They'd escaped for now, but they had no idea who had come for them, or who would come next. Mason turned to Julian. They're not going to stop. Julian exhaled, watching the fog of his breath fade into the night.
No.
But this time neither will we. They reached the city outskirts just before 11 p.m., crammed in the back of a delivery van arranged by Julian's contact. The files had been backed up. The photos were time-stamped, and the final upload, Mason's video testimony, was set to go live in exactly 45 minutes. Samantha sat hunched over her phone, watching the upload bar inch forward with painful slowness. Julian sat opposite her, head bowed, running through every possible exit route if things went wrong. Mason, calm but pale, clutched the final hard copy of his story. His name, his diagnosis, the proof of how he was rewritten by his own blood. We need to be in view of a public camera when this goes live, Julian said. Somewhere they can't touch us without being seen. Samantha nodded. There's a church plaza nearby with security lights and 24-hour surveillance. We'll make it look like we're just walking. No sudden movements. No panic. They exited the van near the plaza, walking side by side through the open courtyard under the glow of a large golden clock tower. As the second hand crept toward midnight, Mason checked his phone. 11:58, 11:59. Then midnight. The file went live. Samantha's phone buzzed. Video live. Downloads. 3,217. Shared. 9,874. Trending in New York, Lagos, London. She looked at Mason. It's out. But even as relief washed over them, a sleek black car parked silently at the edge of the plaza. Out stepped Elaine, dressed in black. No smile. No fury. Just resignation. She walked toward them slowly. Alone. You really did it, she said softly. You let the world watch the family fall apart. Mason stared at her with a strange calm. No, he said. I let them see what it always was. Elaine stood beneath the clock tower, like a relic from a collapsing empire. The square was quiet, the air dense with something heavier than fear, truth. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't beg. Instead, she looked directly at Mason and said, You've made your choice. You've torn this family's name apart. But there's still time to vanish. We'll give you new identities, new lives disappear, and all of this goes away. Samantha scoffed, but Mason raised a hand gently. He stepped forward, his voice calm. You built a prison and called it protection. You destroyed your own sons and called it order. We're not disappearing. You are. Elaine's face flickered with something for the first time, regret maybe, or fear. You think truth protects you, she whispered. The people we worked with, they don't lose. They erase. From the shadows, Julian stepped out. Then they can start with me, he said, voice steady, eyes locked on hers. I'm alive. And I'm not hiding anymore. Security cameras blinked from three corners of the plaza. Pedestrians had paused. Phones were recording. The world was watching. Elaine didn't speak again. She only turned, got into her car, and vanished down the street. Moments later, Samantha's phone buzzed. A breaking news alert flashed across the screen. Harrow's exposed. Viral testimony sparks international investigation into elite wellness facility. Family of billionaire Mason Carter accused of medical misconduct and human identity fraud. She looked at Mason. He looked toward the sunrise breaking through the skyline, his shoulders lighter than they'd ever been. What now? She asked. Mason exhaled. Now we built something real. Something they can't rewrite. And in the soft light of morning, with the world finally listening, the silence they'd suffered through began to shatter.